Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And just like every week, this week we'll take a little bit commoner topic, and that is plano-valgoid foot in children and treatment approach. So, just a moment. So, plano-valgoid is a very common condition, as you all know, and you must be coming across that very frequently in your clinic practice. So if we see the definition of plano-valgoid feet, there are three components. One is hind foot, which is in valgus. The forefoot is in abduction, and medial arch is collapsed. So if you see a child from back, you will see the heel is going into valgus. The forefoot is a little bit of abduction, and medial arch is collapsed. And in some patients, we see that there is midfoot break because of the stretched out mid-tarsal plantar ligaments. So these are the three components of the plano-valgoid feet. Now there are a lot of classifications available in literature, like Tajian divided it into mild, moderate, and severe. Then there are mobile flat feet and non-mobile. But what I follow is in my practice is whether it's a flexible plano-valgoid feet or it's a rigid plano-valgoid feet. And then the treatment differs, and it also helpful in diagnosing the condition, prognosticating it, that how it would behave. And further, flexible plano-valgoid can be divided into asymptomatic flexible feet and symptomatic flexible flat feet. So let's see them one by one. The flexible flat feet or physiologic flat feet is considered to be due to maternal relaxin hormone entering into fetal circulation, and this hormone gets metabolized as the child grows, and it resolves spontaneously. This flat feet resolves spontaneously in about 80 to 85% children by the age of 5 to 6 years. These children do not have any heel cord tightness, and they typically show generalized hyperlaxity. And Lynn Staheley used to say that flat feet are usual in infants, common in children, and unusual in adolescents. Itself, this sentence reflects the natural history of physiologic flat feet, that most of them, they improve by the age of 6 years, while there some of them may persist. Dr. Staheley has done phenomenal work on flat feet, and if some of you are interested, you can go through this paper from JBJS 1987, and he found that most of the kids, they have flat feet before 4 years, and gradually the number of flat feet reduces, meaning that they improve spontaneously. So how flexible flat feet would look? So a child comes to your clinic having flat arch, heel is in little bit of valgus, and the moment you ask the parents to take them in their lap, you can see the arches are reappearing. So this is a flexible flat feet. If you see an older child, you ask them to stand on their toes, or you do the jackhammer toe test where you just dorsiflex the great toe, the arch would reappear. So again, this is a sign of flexible flat feet. Generalized hyperlaxity is common in most of these children. You can check at the first CMC joint. Some of them would have a calcaneus deformity, and in knee joint, they might have grade 2 ACL laxity as well. So flexible flat feet should have two important components. One is the arches would reappear on non-weight bearing, and second, their heel cords are stretchable. So there is no tightness in the heel cord. Now, there are many questions which are asked by families, and I see my fellows and some colleagues, they succumb to their families argument or their need. But I'll show you the evidence why we should deny all those treatment other than general observation. The first question would come to you is, can an orthosis change the natural history of flexible flat feet? And the answer is no. And this is a lovely paper in JBJS 1989, published by Dr. Wenger. And they have applied, it was a randomized trial where they have applied orthosis, medial arch, and there was a placebo group, meaning which did not receive anything. And at the end of 3 years, none of the group had significant difference, and those patients who were wearing orthosis of any sort, they did not have arch appeared. So this paper brought that this shoe wear does not, or orthosis does not change the natural history of flat feet. So that's the first thing. You should deny that this child is asymptomatic, flexible flat feet. There is no indication of orthosis. The second question is, will special shoes halt the progression of the deformity? So many a times parents would, someone has come in family and has said that your child is walking with flat feet, and they would feel that pehle to aise nahi chalta tha, so now let us put on some shoes so that this deformity would stop from progressing. The answer is no. And read this paper. This is from Journal of Orthopedic Science, published in 2016. This is a paper from Turkey. And just a moment. Huh? Hello. Hello. Yeah, I'm Dr. Molly. I'm in the middle of a lecture. Can I call you later? Please, thank you. So if you go through this paper, this is from Turkey, and they have used corrective shoes to create longitudinal arch in children. And they also found that there is no significant difference between the case and the control group. And so this paper shows that there is no role of special shoes. The moment you apply it, you don't see the flat feet, but the moment you take it out, you will see the flat feet coming back. The third question is, can exercises help develop strong arches? And why this question is important, because many physiotherapists, they teach some exercise, or they call these patients with flexible flat feet routinely to their clinic, and they take credit of the natural history. So the answer to this question is also no. There is no role of exercise to develop arch. At the same time, Dr. Benjamin Joseph from Manipal, he published this survey of 1,846 skeletally mature persons, adults, and furthermore, they published one more study including 2,300 children, Southern Indian children, and this very interesting paper. They found that the incidence amongst children who used footwear before 10 years was 8.6%, while those who have not used footwear, or who were walking bare feet, the incidence of flat feet was only 2.8%. So they concluded that the rate of flat foot was less for adults who first time wore the shoe after 10 years. So this flat feet is more a disease of an urban population rather than rural area, because their children, they walk in on uneven terrain, and they require to use their plantar surface to grip the ground, and that's how they make their arches strong, compared to those children who are staying in urban area with this Spartak style, so they do not have opportunity to grip the ground. And of course, they found that there are high rates in hyperlaxity and in obesity. So while specific exercise routinely performed by physiotherapists in their clinic is not indicated in flexible flat feet, I always advise parents to make the child walk bare feet in the garden or in sand or some uneven surface, so that it helps in making their plantar arches strong in an attempt to grip the ground. One more question is, can persistent flat feet cause significant disability? Because sometimes they would say that we had similar problem in our family, and now this man has grown to 40s and he is having pain occasionally. How we can prevent this from happening in my child? So there's an interesting story. In 1940s, American Army brought a rule that the person with flat feet should not be recruited for in army, American Army. And in 1949, there is a lovely army foot survey done in Canada. Dr. Harith, and this is if you see, this is a 150-page monogram. And they found that 30% of these army recruits had some or other degree of flat feet, and they were working very well. What they found is, those army recruits who have tight tendo Achilles, tight gastrocsoleus associated with flat feet, They occasionally had pain while doing march or something, but rest of them, they did not have any symptoms. And so they brought that rule that flat feet does not mount for rejection from the recruitment in army. So there's an interesting survey, you can read, it is available online. And sometimes we see family members affected from flat feet. So our job becomes easier. We can tell them that, see, you had flat feet, the father had flat feet, or mom has flat feet, and you don't have any problem. So similarly, if your child remains thin and lean and his heel cords are not tight, the child would not have any problem in future. Now, then question comes, what about those which are symptomatic, and how many percentage of patient can become symptomatic flat feet? So this percentage is less than 10%. And that's mainly, again, they can become symptomatic in adolescence. So which are the risk factors which can lead to a symptomatic flexible flat feet? And two red flags which I always warn my parents about is, one is obesity, another is tight heel cord. So the patients with high BMI can have higher chances of developing painful flat feet in the adolescence, and so as the tight heel cord. If a heel cord is tight, it will develop a gradually worsening flat feet and mid-feet break, and those patients are better treated with earlier physiotherapy than later. Now I know that you all know the silver skiol test, but this is, I see many fellows doing it a very wrong way. So this is very important test to identify whether TA is tight or not. And how it will start, you have to hold the foot in inversion. When you invert the foot, you are locking the subtalar joint. So whatever movement you see is coming from the ankle. When you fail and you keep the foot everted, the subtalar joint is free, and when you do the dorsiflexion, it is coming from the midfoot level, and it may give you a false idea of dorsiflexion at ankle joint. So first and foremost thing, invert the foot and then start examining. So what you do first is you check the dorsiflexion with the knee flexed at 90 degrees, and you check from the lateral side. Now, many a times we check from the medial side and then we see that, oh, there is good dorsiflexion, but always check from the lateral side. That is a true dorsiflexion. And if this dorsiflexion is less than 10 degrees, then it suggests that with knee flexion, the dorsiflexion is reduced. That means that gastrocnemius is tight. And then you extend the foot, extend the knee joint and see what happens. If this dorsiflexion further reduces or it is less than 10 degrees, that it means that this is a total gastrocsoleus or tendoachelis shortening. So silver skiol test is very important, and whenever you find less than 10 degrees of dorsiflexion, you have to enroll patient for some physiotherapy sessions and teach them a home program and see how they behave later on. Now let's come to the symptomatic flat feet. What symptoms these patients would have if they have? So main complaint is their frequent wear of shoes, and mainly because they load on the medial side, their medial side of heel is worn off. If you call them, if you see their shoe wear, it will be, there will be punctures and thinning of the sole on the medial side and the plantar medial side. So that's the first thing. And sometimes families are like, say they complain कि सर इसको हर 2 महीने पे shoes बदलना पड़ता है, वो shoes घिस देता है. So that's an irritating thing to parents. And pain is the main complaint for many patients. Like they would have pain on the plantar medial side, or sometimes they have on the sinus tarsi side because of the impingement. So these two are the main complaints. How we treat them? Here we advise sometimes this kind of felt heel cups, which keeps the hind foot in neutral and gives little bit arch, and this can be worn in normal shoe. And in older children where there is significant midfoot break or talar head is protruding, we advise deformity accommodating insoles, and we put them in shoe wear. Many times we orthopedic surgeons do a mistake of prescribing medial arch or higher medial arch, in the presence of a little bit of TA tightness, where the tendoachelis pushes the talar head plantar medial side, and you advise high medial arch, that will conflict and that will give more pain, and some patients may become worsened. So do not prescribe high arch shoes or high medial arch. Always prescribe an deformity accommodating orthosis, and your orthotist can make these insoles for you. Now the question is when to operate upon symptomatic flexible flat feet. So the first and foremost thing is the patient should be exhausted with conservative treatment. So every time they come to us, we explain that like we will try exercise, we will try orthosis, we will try, sometimes I have done casting, but if it fails, then we will do surgery. But do not say anytime that you get the surgery done. Let them buy that surgery from you, because uh, there are some reasons I'll tell you. And the second indication is the patient, some patients may have disability due to pain. They have impingement pain and they walk some distance and then they are very painful. And some patients with having very grostic planovalgoid, where the forefoot is in significant abduction and the talar heads is jetting out very significantly. And this cosmetic deformity is associated with some psychosocial issue in some families. There we do the surgical correction. Now the caution which we should explain to family is, we are correcting the biomechanics, but we are not able to correct the underlying original basic cause of hyperlaxity. So we cannot do anything to the structure of ligaments. So there is some likelihood that this deformity will come back. And this is true especially when we perform this surgery for younger children, you know. So when we are treating children of 10-11 years, there are high likelihood that deformity may come back if child does not follow orthotic wear or exercises things. So explain to them that this deformity may come back because we are not dealing with the primary cause. So calcaneal lengthening osteotomy, I will not talk in great details as Jayant will talk about CP foot, but this is an osteotomy between the middle and the distal facet, and you have to put in a trapezoid bone graft taken from the iliac crest. And by putting this graft, you are lengthening the calcaneum, making the anterior tuberosity of calcaneum support the talar head. And so you can correct the arch. At the same time, you can correct the talonavicular coverage, also can improve. Now, this is an example. This boy had symptomatic flat feet, and you can see that the calcaneum lies way behind the talus, and the medial part of talus is uncovered. And I have done calcaneal lengthening. We have placed this trapezoid graft, and you can see from here we can correct to this. So it has been transfixed with a K-wire to prevent this calcaneocuboid subluxation. And one can see that talar head, which was facing plantar side, can now face in the front, and the arch has been recreated. So this surgery can be done, and along with this, we do plication of the talonavicular capsule, and sometimes we also plicate the tibialis posterior tendon medially. And after doing this lengthening, if we find the tendoachilles is tight, we also should do the tendoachilles lengthening, depending on the Silver-Stewart test. Whether it's gastroc tightness, then we do gastroc recession. If there is tendoachilles tightness, then we can do a percutaneous sliding or an open Z lengthening. So this relation of talocalcaneal also got neutralized. Now, arthrolysis is a new technique which many people, especially the podiatrists, start discussing about. And many adult foot surgeons, they also vouch for this technique being advantageous, that it's minimally invasive, and it's less complicated procedure, smaller scar, and they kind of sell this procedure based on those advantages. I was searching through papers, and most of the papers were published in podiatry journals. But this paper is from JPO 1998. And here they have found and quoted good results in neuromuscular feet. But their role in hypermobile flexible flat feet is still not clear. But I follow Vince Mosca, and now it is available in such small screws also. you can put this screw. There are some biodegradable screws available, very minimally invasive, but this paper show at least 30% rate of complications, and these complications can be undercorrection, overcorrection, implant resorption, inflammatory reaction, or persistent pain. So the question is, one of one out of every three patient would have some or other complications. So is it acceptable, you know? And then you have to take that call after discussing with parents. I personally, when I was doing my fellowship in Sikki's in foot unit, they were not pro of this procedure, because we used to see a lot of complications from the outside patients treated. I'm not sure. I would like to hear from some of you if you have experience of this arthritis. I don't have that experience. Now let's come to the rigid planovalgoid feet. Now, so far we discussed the flexible feet, asymptomatic ones and the symptomatic ones, and what treatment we would do. Now, which are the rigid planovalgoid feet? So let's start with the case. And this boy presented to me last month, and the typical complaint was that the moment we put the child down, उसके पैर flat हो जाते हैं, वो बाहर की ओर जाता है. So when we checked the child very closely, we found that right side foot is going more out than the left, and on right side this second toe is kind of overlapping the first one, and the heel also you can see a little bit up compared to the left side, and there is a deep single crease, so suggestive that there might be some tendo-Achilles tightness on this side. And the second thing we did is we took the patient on couch, and on non-weight bearing examination, we found that on the left side arches reappear, but on right side the arch has not reappeared. It is still flat. So it was not a very not a straightforward case of flexible flat feet. And so what we need to do to differentiate between flexible flat feet or oblique talus and vertical talus, we have to get stress, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion views. Now what we have to see in stress plantar flexion view, so first you have to draw a line from the metatarsal. Now you remember, in infants we don't see navicular. Navicular is not ossified. So we take these first metatarsal talar angle as a surrogate of talonavicular dislocation. So you draw a line from the base of first metatarsal, and then draw a line through the long axis of talus. And this is termed as talo first metatarsal angle in stress plantar flexion view. And it is said that there's a very nice paper from Japan, Dr. Hirishama or something. It's a wonderful, he has devised this and he has suggested a classification based on this. And he mentions when there is more than 30 degree of talo first metatarsal angle, that is more prone to have CVT rather than oblique talus. So the first thing you have to measure on stress plantar flexion is talo first metatarsal angle. On left side you can see this angle is less than 30, but on right side it is almost 35 to 40 degrees. And the second thing I ask my fellows to see is the distance between the posterior tibia and the calcaneum, and compare this distance when you do a stress dorsiflexion view. So when this distance increases substantially, this means that your calcaneum is not locked. And when this distance remains the same, meaning that this calcaneum is locked or there is TA, tendo-Achilles tightness. So you have to identify what happens to calcaneum on the lateral dorsiflexion and plantar flexion view. So in the stress dorsiflexion view, what we do not actually, you can measure the metatarsal talar axis, but in dorsiflexion you will always see increase in the metatarsal talar axis. So in dorsiflexion you don't need to see that. What you need to see is the the tibio-calcaneal angle. Now in this side you can see that the calcaneum on right side is in equinus, and on the left side it is in dorsiflexion. So again, you can see the distance between the tibia and calcaneum is not increasing on the right side, but it is increasing on the left. So this is the locked calcaneum on the right side, which is suggestive of the tendo-Achilles tightness. So this boy, these are the static X-ray, and we concluded that this boy is having rigid flat feet on the right and flexible one on the left side. Now the question is, yeah, so always whenever you see a vertical talus, so check the back for neural tube defect. Now this boy also have tethered cord syndrome, and about 50% of vertical talus patients have underlying neurologic conditions. So never fail to check your spine, it will give you clue why this has happened. So how we differentiate based on this X-rays between vertical talus, oblique talus, and flexible flat feet, and how our treatment differs. So I follow this thing in my practice. So in stress views, you see this talo first metatarsal angle on plantar flexion stress view. If it is more than 30 degrees, it is mostly suggests of vertical talus. If it is less than 30, that can be both oblique or flexible flat feet. But you see the calcaneum, whether calcaneum is locked or not. If it is locked, then CVT is there. If it is locked and talo first metatarsal angle is less than 30 degrees, this is an oblique talus. In oblique talus, what happens is there is subluxation of talonavicular joint, but there is not complete dislocation as we see in vertical talus. Okay, and in flexible flat feet, there is subluxation due to hyperlaxity. So this is how you differentiate them based on these two X-rays. And treatment, of course, CVT needs reduction of the joint. Oblique talus, you can start stretching TA, or in very severe cases, you do percutaneous TA tenotomy and give plaster in inversion plantar flexion, and they would improve. And flexible flat feet, they don't need any treatment. The problem is sometimes, the ossification of talus is so small, we are not able to judge from where we have to draw a line. And so our radiologic parameters would turn wrong. So there it becomes problematic. And now there comes the role of dynamic ultrasound. We tend to do dynamic ultrasound in some such patients, and dynamic ultrasound with foot neutral dorsiflexion and plantar flexion can differentiate. Now say for example, this boy, this is talus and this is navicular. So navicular is never completely, in dorsiflexion it goes dorsally, but in plantar flexion it aligns very well with talus. So this is an oblique talus, but vertical talus would remain dislocated in dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, and neutral. So dynamic ultrasound can be done for these rare situations so that you can decide what treatment you have to do. And if someone is interested in learning technique, and it's very easy technique, this is the paper Pediatric Radiology in 2013. You can go through and can use ultrasound in some problematic cases. For a proven infantile idiopathic CVT, or even for arthrogrypotic, one can do this reverse Ponseti technique described by Matthew Dobbs and Jose Morquendo, where they turn the foot invert absolutely in reverse fashion, so that in the last plaster, a vertical talus foot should look like a club foot. And once they clinically feel that the talar head is reducing, then they perform a percutaneous mini open, not percutaneous, mini open talonavicular reduction, and they fix it with a temporary K wire. K wire is kept on for 2 to 3 weeks, and then it is removed. So in earlier paper of Matthew Dobbs, he has done talonavicular reduction by closed means, by just taking reference of first metatarsal and talar head, but there were some incidents of persistent of dislocation. So he came to open reduction. It becomes occasionally difficult to convince patients, parents of 2 months old for a small surgery and wire placement. But if we can do this surgery earlier on, we can have good outcome. And some patient, you have to test, you have to understand whether patient will agree to this or not. There are some patients who do not agree for procedure under GA at 2 months. Then I would just apply a brace at that time and would operate around 1 year, the same mini open reduction, and followed by tendo-Achilles lengthening. So T8 lengthening is done percutaneously as we do in club feet, and that will finish the procedure. So this was a baby, 1 month old bilateral idiopathic CVT, and you can see all the elements of rigid flat feet. And at that time, this second paper of Matthew Dobbs didn't come, so I did reduce under image intensifier guidance and placed K wires, and this is 1 year follow-up. So this and few more children I have treated this way have done well. And then there are some syndromic children, arthrogrypotic, or some even idiopathic, but very severe variety. They do not correct at all. So there we just give some low profile plastic molded brace and call them at 1 year, and we operate. There are many ways you can operate these children. There can be one dorsal incision. I prefer 3 separate incisions: medial, lateral, and posterior, and the results are good in most of them. So you have to transfix, of course, and you can achieve such a result. So now these are the moderate deformities. We see very severe deformities, and some of them they end up having talonavicular fusion, because the space is so narrow you cannot reduce the joint, so you have to cut the part of talar head and the navicular articular surface, and you have to reduce and fuse it. And in some very severe cases, we also do triple fusion in adolescents. So that's a spectrum of CVT. And OT, like oblique talus, we just do therapy, and if TA is tight, we do percutaneous release there too. Once in a while, you may see accessory navicular syndrome. This syndrome is a triad of flexible flat feet, hyperlaxity, and accessory navicular bone. But this can be a part of the natural history of disease because of the flat arch. Tibialis posterior has a role to pull more, and there is a traction apophysitis on navicular. So they have very gross deformity, see. And here you cannot say them that you get away with this. You have to try different orthoses, and some of them they really need surgery because they're very painful. So as you can see, this patient is having accessory navicular bone. So I require to excise those in one of the patients. So their pain has gone, but the patients still have flat feet, and they are not happy with the shape. So at times you can do osteotomy. Now, one more common reason of planovalgoid, a rigid planovalgoid, is a tarsal coalition, and talocalcaneal coalition is and calcaneonavicular coalition, but they both are very common. With talocalcaneal coalition and lateral view, you will see this C sign, and this C sign suggests that there is a middle facet coalition, and sometimes you also see the beak on the radial head, showing that there is less movement at subtalar region and the movements are transferred distally. So CT scan is diagnostic. You can do CT scan and see the middle facet is joined, and you have to see the extent of bar. Sometimes it is also extending on the posterior facet. And this paper is worth reading. This is from Vince Mosca, and Vince Mosca has devised a kind of algorithmic approach for the patients with tarsal talocalcaneal coalition. And what he described is, when the coalition is less than 50% of the whole joint space with very minimal hindfoot valgus, you just excise the resection. I mean, you excise the coalition, and that will give good result. But when the joint is involved is more than 50%, and still there is mild hindfoot valgus, you have to do calcaneal lengthening, and you don't go for coalition excision, because that will not work well. So there he does only calcaneal lengthening. And patients with smaller coalition with severe hindfoot deformity, he does both. So coalition resection as well as calcaneal lengthening. And they have shown in a series of about 15 to 20 patients good outcome based on this. Because earlier on, people used to do triple arthrodesis for patients with non-resectable talocalcaneal coalitions. But Vince Mosca has proposed this algorithm to avoid triple fusion. And this is a good paper from JBJS American. And calcaneonavicular coalition resection is quite rewarding surgery. I've done a few, and parents are always happy. So as family, this girl presented with left side planovalgoid foot, as you can see, and her arch was flat on left side while arch was good on the right side. and we got the X-ray. On left side there is a bony talonavicular calcaneonavicular bar, and on the right side there is some gap is seen. So this is a fibrous coalition, and in natural history this fibrous coalition would end up in a couple of years into a bony coalition. So explain that to the family that the child might have deformity on the other side. CT scan can help you see the extent of the bar. At the same time, it can also help you delineating that the coalition is not existing in other joints, because sometimes you just resect the calcaneonavicular coalition and you do not address the talocalcaneal, patient may have persistent symptoms. So surgery is pretty simple. Incision along the Langer's line, expose subcutaneously and safeguard the nerve, and then you expose the extensor digitorum brevis. Take the extensor digitorum brevis with a cautery dissection, take a suture. You want to put it through the excision, then expose the bar. It will look something like this, and take it out, mark on IITV, take more than what you think you have to, and the gap would look like this. And on the plantar surface you should see the plantar muscle tendons traversing, because many a time it happens with a very small area and you end up resecting less amount of bar. The another thing you need to see is the moment you excise the coalition, there should be beginning of inversion movement. Most of these kids have good eversion, but they have less inversion. So the moment you resect, you should see improved range of inversion. Like this, you can see that plantar muscles, and you can also see that subtalar joint. Now this is the talar head, and you can check the talar range of motion. And you take fat graft from the calf or from buttock and put it, and you must be able to see such a rectangular window on your X-ray. And my bosses in Sikh, Jim Wright, used to say this window should be more than what you expect. So you excise more, otherwise it may refuse if you're not resecting optimum. And in some cases I have done interpositioning of EDB. So I pass my Keith needle through this gap, bring it out on the plantar surface as we do in tibialis anterior transfer. So there is fat interpositioning, or you can also do the muscle interpositioning, and both results are good in both the patients. And most of the times you operate on one side, the child would come for the surgery on the next side after a couple of years. One more reason, now we see less and less, but we see a lot of rocker bottom feet after posteromedial release surgeries done by our adult colleagues at times. And they also behave like vertical talus, and you have to perform the same approach as we do in neglected vertical talus surgery. So this is a spectrum of flat feet, rigid planovalgoid feet. So I like to conclude that planovalgoid feet are mostly a benign problem in childhood. In adolescence, it can become symptomatic if there is a coexisting obesity or heel cord is tight. And some of them, they are significant enough to warrant orthopedic intervention, with a caution that this deformity may come back. And we should keep the differential diagnosis in mind to cater them timely. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you. Is Jayant there with us? Hi, Vivekanand, how are you? Okay, so now there are few questions in my chat box, so I'll try to answer them, and then we'll take other questions. Okay. So this is from Sudhanshu from Amritsar. So his question is, any role of gastroc recession alone for flat feet with tight Achilles? Meaning that symptomatic flat feet with tight Achilles tendon. So we see once in a while the patients who are non-cerebral palsy children, and still they have tight tendo Achilles. or some of the older kids with these idiopathic toe walkers, sometimes they go to midfoot break and planovalgoid, and there certainly you should start with the physiotherapy sessions. And if physiotherapy is not sufficient enough, you can check the silver squall test, whether gastroc is tight or it's a whole tendo Achilles. If only gastroc is the reason, you can do high gastroc recess and don't touch to the soleus, because they might have a subtle variety of CP, and by doing low TA you may end up in a crouch gait later on. So always with a silver scale test positive, you go with a high gastroc release or aponeurotic release, and if it is tendo Achilles, you can do a sliding tenotomy. So yes, there is a role, but we try conservative approach first, and then there is a role of release. Another question is, do you do peroneal brevis lengthening as well while performing calcaneal lengthening? Yes, that is described in Mosca's original technique, and he has seen that where this peroneal are tight and they were not lengthened, they compressed to the lengthening side to some extent. So for that calcaneum to remain lengthened, or to allow good degrees of lengthening, you should do fractional lengthening of peroneal brevis. Dr. Ajay Singh from Lucknow is asking Dr. Maulin whether calcaneal lengthening will correct arch or will deal with pain due to uncovered head of talus. Yes, so earlier on when we do this correction, the arch reappears, and the reason behind when we do calcaneal lengthening, the anterior facet of anterior tuberosity of calcaneum comes underneath the talar head, and so there appears the arch. In these procedures, we also plicate the we shorten. Once we do calcaneal lengthening, you will see that the slick in tib post. So you have to plicate tibialis posterior, and in severe cases, we also see the capsule of talonavicular becomes loose, and you do plication. So their arch would correct, and pain will go, because this pain is because of sinus tarsi impingement. So pain will go, but some of these patients after some time the arch reappears, but they remain pain free for pretty long time. So there is a role of calcaneal lengthening. Now the next question is Dr. Prabhat Kumar. How to check clinically a rigid planovalgoid to a flexible one? So that's what I told you. Have to perform the key thing is whether tendo Achilles is tight or not. If you can, with foot inversion, you can dorsiflex the foot completely, and this dorsiflexion should be more than 10 degrees with knee extension. And if it is more than 10 degrees, that means that your tendo Achilles is stretchable, so that becomes flexible. For those simpler varieties, simply you make the child sit in the lap of mother, and when they are non-weight bearing, the arch would appear. I'm talking about those kind of oblique talus kind of patients where you have to check tendo Achilles. When if tendo Achilles is stretchable, you can wait and watch, and many times you don't need to do anything. Dr. Jignesh, what is the chances of skeletal changes proximally, means knee joint or hip joint? Yeah, so this is a question many patients ask us, that what would happen if we leave these flat feet? Will this lead to osteoarthritis or lateral compartment arthritis in future, or something in hip joint? Uh, I don't know, because we don't do adult practice, and neither I saw when I was doing adult practice before many years. I never see a person having arthritis because of flat feet. But this Canadian Army survey shows that about 30% of normal Army recruits had some or other degree of flat feet. So, and they were involved into march and all those things. So I'm not the right person to answer those, but I don't do surgeries based on that argument that that person will become symptomatic in adulthood, so I will operate now. I would not operate. Now Gaurav is saying that I have seen some adolescents with flexible flat feet complaining of pain in the medial side of foot. MRI diagnosed question is so many. So let me, huh. MRI diagnosed posterior tibial tendon dysfunction, sometimes even rupture. How to manage that in adolescents to avoid this? Yeah. So these patients, Gaurav, they would I'm sure they would have certain degrees of tendo Achilles tightness, and we have to keep these patients in the follow up. You know, it's not no always. Like when we see that some patients which are not improving, they remain in persistent flat feet, or their deformity is not cosmetically sound, they have some degree of TA tightness, we keep them in follow up. And if they keep on worsening, and if they complain of pain, so before they rupture that tib post, they would have pain along sinus tarsi or on the medial side. They would wear and tear their shoe. That we uh, Before I went to, I mean, my training, they always ask that bring your shoes in, and they would check the shoe wear. So we explain those things to family, and the posterior tibial tendon dysfunction happens pretty late. And before that, you will see that accessory navicular, I mean, traction apophysitis. And if that repeatedly it is happening, then can lead to, so we should not let them reach to that stage. Uh, Sometimes if they come at that state, then you have to do calcaneal lengthening, and you may plicate the tip post, or suture it, and then the problem would resolve once biomechanics is improved, and they have to wear their orthosis for some period of time. Yes. So Jignesh, I hope Gaurav, I could answer your question. Yeah. Then Jignesh is asking, what is the chance of skeletal changes? So Jignesh, I don't know that answer. So Jignesh is our orthotist. He like, I now realize why he asked this question, that some patients have knee pain or arthritis. So Jignesh, we have to see that how many adults have knee pain without flat feet also. So we have to see the flat feet is not responsible for all the knee pains in future. At least I feel that. Now the next question is, was there any collapse of trapezoidal graft during calcaneal lengthening in post-op? Uh, well, what he mentioned once, Dr. Mosca, is when they did not lengthen the peroneal in very severe cases, they could not lengthen calcaneum enough for optimum correction. The other thing would happen is when it is not adequate, uh, the graft. Now this graft is quite structural. You take tricortical graft from iliacus, so it will not collapse, but it would certainly not allow. What would happen when you don't lengthen the peroneal? There will be calcaneocuboid subluxation would take place, because there is not enough length. So cuboid will subluxate in the dorsally, and that is a cause of pain. And uh, so peroneal lengthening should be done if it is very tight. Rahul's question, what are the long-term outcomes of Dobbs method? Do they maintain arches? Yes, if they are corrected well, and they are idiopathic ones, they do well. The arthrogrypotics one, I don't see they come up, because the lateral structures are so much tight, we cannot invert the foot completely, and most of them they end up into open surgeries at the skeletal, I mean at 1 year time. But idiopathic ones, which I have treated, and many of our colleagues they have treated, they do well, and they maintain arch. The only thing is, when you are not well versed with the talonavicular anatomy or anatomy on the medial side of foot, sometimes he mentions that you do mini open reduction, but if you don't see, then you do a formal, you can open a little bit. It will not take long time to close that wound, but be very sure that your talonavicular joint has reduced well. Sometimes you may mistake the navicular plantar, you may mistake the talar head is usually, it lies more proximal than what you expect or what you feel. So what you mistake talar head is sometimes the plantar capsule, which is very tight. So do not worry about opening a little bit more, confirm your reduction. So Gaurav again is asking, apart from generalized hyperlaxity, some podiatric journals suggest recurrent talotarsal joint dysfunction, which can be diagnosed on feet X-ray. Talotarsal dysfunction. Also, they have shown successful correction, with this method. Now I agree. Now we had some adult foot surgeon came from UK, and he has popularized this EOTTS, and they put that small implant in subtalar joint. It's an arthrolysis, and they have shown short-term follow-up that this arch is corrected, feet is looking like this. So all my flat feet patients would come to me and they would ask whether it is fruitful. You always say there is no need of surgery. Should we do this? So there's a paper from Vince Mosca, a review where he has, there are 3 papers which shows the complications of arthrolysis, and it shows that 30% patients has some or other complications. So if your patient is ready to undergo that thing, it's otherwise I would rely more on calcaneal lengthening osteotomy rather than arthrolysis. But I know that all podiatric journals they swear by their own regimen, and they suggest very good result. The papers of quality of those papers are not very sound though, if you read carefully. So what is the ideal age of operating symptomatic plano-valgoid foot? Is by Kaisar from Bangladesh. So Kaisar, I feel that the treatment is not based on the age, but treatment is based on the symptoms. If you have exhausted all your conservative measures, then you have to perform. But younger patients you perform, there are high chance that this deformity would recur. So I would try to buy time by trying and some non-operative treatment. At times I have also done casting, non-weight bearing casting for a few weeks. There is another terminology people use is a peroneal spastic flat feet, where due to some systemic inflammatory disease, patients would have subtalar inflammation. I have injected Kenacort in subtalar and ankle joints there and given inversion casts, and some of them have improved. So we should try to avoid surgery, because it's very easy surgery, but once the deformity comes back, it's a problem. It's just like hallux valgus surgery we do. It's very easy surgery to neutralize the hallux, but with the age, it gets either on the varus or valgus side, and then it becomes a problem. Yes, so Jayant is commenting that he transfer brevis to longus for calcaneal. So Jayant, we would like to hear more about this once you talk to us. Then the question is collapse. Is it described the trapezius collapse? I don't know whether it's described. I had word with Dr. Mosca when he came to Delhi, but he suggests that you lengthen peroneus, and as Jan said, you can tie with longus. He would tell us more in details about it. Gaurav says that nowadays there are type 2 arthrolysis devices with implant removal rate of 5 to 6% with almost negligible foreign body reaction. They are being used by foot and ankle surgeons quite successfully. Yes, so that is a possibility. I do not have much experience. So Jayant will also explain that Mosca liked his idea about for peroneus longus to brevis transfer. Yes, longus is first metatarsal depressor, brevis adds to restoration of arch. Great. So I think if there is no further question, let's Jayant, are you there? Please speak out.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can. So I'll stop.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually tomorrow is Ayudha Puja, but in my hospital they've brought it forward to today, and I got a little held up with doing the pujas in the department and all that. So anyway, it's Dashara here.
Do you have any presentation to share?
No, I don't have a presentation.
Okay.
But I just want to. You can see me.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So basically, I think you wanted me to talk about planovalgus feet in cerebral palsy.
Yes.
And really, I see only three main factors that will help me decide. First is the age of the patient. Second is what is the GMFCS level. And third is what is the severity or correctability of the deformity. So with those three factors, you can pretty much decide what to do in any particular case. In fact, we had a fairly lengthy discussion, and I was doing a literature review recently about the correction of plantar valgus feet in CP. And the consensus is up to the age of 10 or 11 years is to brace, brace, brace. And this is actually, I'm involved in some international multi-center trial, CP trial, and plantar valgus feet were one of the factors. And, surgeons from everywhere appear to have fairly good consensus that until the sort of pre-adolescent years when you would be considering things like multi-level surgery, etc., better to hold off on bracing. And the literature firmly agrees with that the primary management of midfoot breach, planovalgus, equinovalgus, whatever valgus deformity in CP is bracing. And bracing seems to be very important. And a lot of it is driven by the natural history. And primarily we do correction in GMFCS levels 1 and 2 as part of gait improvement surgery. And when you are doing gait improvement surgery, it's very important to correct the feet, because if you have valgus feet, it completely alters the ground reaction, how the knee can harness the ground reaction force. So I'm sure everyone has seen this talk, these pictures where if you have an externally rotated foot, you can't really get the ground reaction force to go in front of the knee. So even if you do very good knee surgery, you may not get a straight knee after it. So the knee will go straight on the table, and when you stand them, the knee will be straight. But the minute they start walking, once their feet go into valgus, you will see that they are falling back into crouch again. So foot correction surgery is a very important and essential component of overall gait improvement surgery. So if there is any foot deformity, you should do it together. So that's very important. And also, they all happen together. So as the gait decompensation occurs and the child becomes a candidate for gait improvement surgery, that's roughly the time they'll be 10, 11 years old, and their feet also will become unbraceable. So all of it happens together. In, I'd say 8, 9 out of 10 cases, they all happen together so that you can fix it all at one stage. Now, what to do about the young child who has a very severe foot deformity, who is GMFCS level 3 and 4. In these cases, I usually use, because they all have very tight gastrocnemius, so I use Botox, I use stretching casts, I brace them very, very strictly. They are never allowed to stand and walk barefoot, except in physio. So from morning till night, they will be only in a molded solid AFO. So I'm very, very careful with the bracing. But in a very select group of patients where I've had very severe valgus, I have done, but these are only a handful, maybe 5, 6 cases in 20 years. I have done a gastroc recession very early, 7, 8 years I've done a gastroc recession. And I've also done an extra-articular arthrodesis of the subtalar joint. Now the principle behind that is it will just hold the deformity. It doesn't touch any of the joints. It just holds the correction for a few years. And then when the patient is, 10, 11, 12 years, I can go and think about it again without having burnt any bridges. Yeah. So if you have a very severe unbraceable foot, valgus foot deformity in a child with CP, typically these are GMFCS level 3s and 4s, you can consider a gastroc recession after the age of 7. And you can consider an extra-articular arthrodesis subtalar joint. So this is all not published data. This is my personal experience, and hopefully in fullness of time, I can present. So I think we have talked in detail about Mosca's calcaneal lengthening procedure, which is the gold standard and the workhorse for correction of equinovalgus or planovalgus foot deformity. I am fairly generous with doing a gastroc recession along with the foot correction. If there is any tightness at all, I would like to get at least 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion of the ankle in supination. And after listening to Mosca's talks 2-3 times, now I am doing the medial procedure as well, the medial, the reefing of the tibialis posterior, the talonavicular capsule, and I'm almost, in most cases, I'm also doing a plantar flexion osteotomy of the first metatarsal through the medial cuneiform. So these have all become fairly standard, and my practice, for the first 15 years was just to do simple calcaneal lengthening and then brevis to longest transfer. So what I do is to release the brevis off at its insertion. I just go, it's 1 centimeter behind brevis is longest, just open the longest tendon sheath, make a little slit in the longest and just do a pulvar tuft. Pull the brevis through the longest and stitch it. And I think you don't lose anything by doing that, and you may gain something because the peroneus longus is a first metatarsal depressor. So it may contribute to depressing the first metatarsal and maintaining a better arch. So I discussed this with Mosca, and Mosca seemed, not averse to the idea. He said, "Oh, that's a rather good idea. I wonder why I didn't think about that earlier." So it was that kind of conversation. But maybe he will adopt this technique and produce results for us in a few years' time. I don't know. So this is for the children GMFCS 1, 2, 3, where we do gait improvement surgery. The 4s and 5s, the deformity is completely different. The functional needs are different, and what surgery we do is different. These are just standards or sitters, and my knowledge regarding this is mainly from Dr. Freeman Miller. As you know, we don't see so many GMFCS 4s and 5s in India, but he was fairly aggressive in treating these. So he used to do subtalar fusions, and he used to do a complete medial column fusion because the recurrence rates in the 4s and 5s is very high. So if you do a standard calcaneal lengthening type operation, the deformity will come back. So something akin to a triple arthrodesis. So you do a distraction arthrodesis of the subtalar of the calcaneal cuboid joint. So instead of lengthening through the neck of the calcaneum, you are lengthening through the calcaneal cuboid joint with, again, a nice big tricortical graft. And then you can do a subtalar fusion at the same time if it's a very severe deformity. And then you have to open the whole medial side. And Freeman Miller used to take out talonavicular joint, navicular cuneiform joint, and cuneiform first metatarsal joints. All the 3 joints used to be taken out. He used to bend a third tubular plate like the exact shape of the arch, and then he just used to fix the foot onto that pre-bended third tubular plate and put bone graft in all the gap. And the GMFCS 4s and 5s have no problems with healing, so they heal up very quickly within 6 to 8 weeks time. So what he wanted to do was to produce a very stiff and stable foot on which the patient could stand. It was a one-off operation, and the risk of recurrence with that is very low. So I think that's a fairly, I think logical way of, so less aggressive surgery in the GMFCS levels 1, 2, and 3, where you want a mobile foot because these children are going to be walking on it. You don't want to fuse the subtalar joint for fear of, causing problems more proximally. But in the more severe GMFCS levels, higher GMFCS levels with severe deformity, go in for a more aggressive procedure that will give you stable long-term results. So this is my rough framework for dealing with planovalgus feet and CP.
Yeah, that's a great summary of your approach to this and what we all follow in our practice. Now, one thing.
Anything you do differently, Maulik?
Yeah, so we see a lot of children who come with a static contracture from earlier on, say 4 years, 5 years. They are not in, they remain in dynamic spasticity for very short time. They turn spastic, they are diplegic, so we don't want to release their tendo Achilles. So we give a triangular wedge. So that's what Dr. Brunner told us, that they do it in Europe. So the amount of heel off when a child is walking, that amount of triangular wedge we give in orthosis, so that there is no jerky movement when child walks. So before the child's heel touches the bar, I mean, what do you say, the sole touches, so they do not have increased reflex spasticity. And anecdotally, I have seen those children, I would Botox them and do couple of casting, then the amount of heel off they have, we will accommodate into that triangular wedge and orthosis. And the speed with which they would come back is little less than earlier, where we used to give all 90-degree air force. So that's one thing which we do to buy time, as you said. And yeah, so and one more thing which you can tell everyone, that the calcaneocuboid wire we pass before we distract, and that's
Yeah.
that's what also we do.
I have a video actually. I have a step-by-step video of the calcaneal lengthening procedure. I'll share it with you. It's on my Google Drive.
Yeah, so we can share with everyone.
You can pass it on to everyone.
Yeah.
It's a standard video which clearly shows all the steps one by one. So
So earlier
so
on,
it's a
as you
I think
see,
everyone does. I don't know any pediatric orthopedic surgeon who doesn't do a calcaneal lengthening. I think everyone will be well versed with the technique.
yeah. So only thing is that 3, 4, and 5.
So, but the key is the decision making.
So any
So,
question for Jen? Anyone?
because
Please unmute and ask. You can ask the
you
question.
can just unmute yourself and ask me. Any questions on P equinovalgus feet? Or if you have any further points to make.
Fine. So I think if we don't have Gaurav,
Wow.
you can share your. So you were so clear, Jen. It's all through their brains.
What?
So, and by the time the Gaurav, you can share your screen. And I have brought that filtered coffee machine, Jen. You told that you will send it to me, but my wife purchased this from Amazon. The filtered coffee thing.
Yeah.
So
I should. Anyway, let all this lockdown finish.
yeah. So Gaurav, you cannot.
I'll send you a picture of it. Is it the South Indian filter coffee thing?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Enter full screen. Side to side. Now, Abhi, how I can let you, Gaurav? Can you share your screen, Gaurav? Share screen. Limit your screen. Share selected of. Hello.
Yeah, I'm not able to share my screen.
Okay. How with that can?
You have to go into.
Oh, you have to enable. Only the host can share.
Yes. Yeah.
There is a feature by which you can enable.
Yeah, Gaurav, you can share it now.
Okay, sir.
So Sudhanshu, I'll explain. I'll call you and explain this triangle. I'll share some pictures with you, and you'll realize what is that AFO thing. Yes, Gaurav, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So am I audible to everyone?
Yeah, can you become a little louder? That will be fine.
Yeah. So fine. So is that okay?
Yes, this is fine. We can see you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is more of a query from all the experts rather than a case discussion. But then, so this is a 2.5-year-old girl with abnormal positioning of feet, as the parents complained. She was delivered normally, immediate cry, normal perinatal period, milestones achieved on time. She has some ligament laxity in the knees and first metacarpophalangeal joint. So as I told that she started walking in time. Now this is the standing picture of the feet from the front and back, showing some planovalgoid and heel valgus. And these pictures, I think, yeah, they are not in inversion, but then she has got a good range of ankle motion, both plantar and dorsiflexion. TA does not look tight to me. And this is the walking video of the child. So this is the walking video of the child, which shows that she walks on the medial border. She didn't cooperate much to show her walking. So mainly she walks on the medial border with a lot.
Right.
The, these are the X-rays which suggest that on plantar flexion, the talus first metatarsal angles become parallel, more on the right side, a slight angle on the left side. The the distance between the talus and calcaneum also improves on plantar and dorsiflexion. So in on dorsiflexion, the angles deteriorate, and and the distance between the talus and the calcaneum changes, which suggests that TA is not very tight. These are the AP views which suggest uncoverage of the talus. So now uh, she went to a few orthopedic surgeons. Amongst them, a few are pediatric ortho, and they suggested that she needs some. They diagnosed it as a congenital oblique talus, and they suggested TA tenotomy and casting. But then I don't feel she has a tight TA, and she needs TA release. And this is a bit more severe than a routine flexible flat feet we see, but this is not rigid, so I don't know how to proceed in this case. So I want comments from Dr. Mollin sir and Jayan sir about how to proceed with this here.
Yeah. So I saw the video, and as you could see, the child is walking very broad base gait, and that happens. When they start walking, they walk with broad base to have more balance. They want to make the basal area broad. When they walk, when they start walking, to increase their span or they increase their base, they also sometimes take their feet outwards so that the base becomes more broader and they feel more balanced, you know. So certainly this is not oblique talus. So how I'll tell you how to differentiate an oblique talus, vertical and flat feet on X-ray. So on X-rays, vertical talus has two elements. The first metatarsal talar angle is more than 30 degrees on plantar flexion view. In dorsiflexion, it's always gonna more, but on a plantar flexion stress view, that will be more than 30 degrees, and the calcaneum will be locked. So in CVT, tendo-Achilles is always tight. So TA would be, calcaneum would look locked. On oblique talus, this angle of first metatarso talar is not more than 30 degrees because it is just subluxation, and but TA would be tight. TA would be tight. So that tight TA leads to little bit of oblique talus. Now, how oblique talus? There is some radiologic classification also is there, but I don't think that is more reliable. They say that the talar head would project between the cuboid and calcaneum. So I don't follow that. But for oblique talus, tendo-Achilles should be tight, and you can advise stretching exercise to start with. In flexible flat feet, you know that this. So this is purely flexible flat feet. To convince us, you should you should do inversion dorsiflexion and make sure that this is more than 10 degrees, and you are sure that this is not tight. When you have some doubt, you can refer them to therapist or teach them home program and call them. And the treatment would be, many a times as they grow, gradually they develop arches. So the reassurance is the treatment. And if the children have good balance, then I do not advise orthosis even. I say that it's wise to not to use any shoe wear, any footwear. Let them walk bare feet, because most of them, they are advised some medial arch support and all this thing, which is actually not necessary. So these are the evidences which I have presented to you in my talk, that why we don't need any arch support. And they may shuffle from one to the other pediatric orthopedic surgeon, but you must say that it does not need any treatment. Yes, Jayant, would you say something different than this?
Yeah. See, what is the treatment of congenital oblique talus? No one has ever. They all talk about all this X-rays and views and all that, but no one has ever told me what is the treatment. What does congenital oblique talus mean? What is the natural history of congenital oblique talus? And what is the treatment? Okay, you made a diagnosis. What does that mean? You have to brace it. So you're saying it's not a flexible flat foot. And in a congenital oblique talus, as far as I am aware, there is no TA tightness, right?
So
because if there is a hindfoot deformity, then when you pull the foot down, the when you push the foot up and pull it down, there isn't going to be a great deal of change, because like what Gaurav showed in this particular case, I mean, this I agree with you is more of a flexible flat foot, but no one has anyone read any paper or anything about what is the management of congenital oblique talus? Because I just don't know. And I've read so many papers. Nobody mentions. They just say, what is it? You have to differentiate between oblique and vertical talus. Okay, now we know the management of vertical talus. What is the management of oblique talus? What is the long-term history, natural history? Is it going to get worse? Will it, does it improve spontaneously? No one, there is no literature on that at all, as far as I am aware. So that's I think it's a bit of a cop-out. So I either classify them into feet that need to be fixed now or feet that don't need to be fixed now. So between this vertical talus and oblique talus, it was originally described by Jayakumar from DuPont, where I worked for some time. So I asked him, and he also didn't give me a satisfactory answer. After 50 years of orthopedic practice, he also he was like, I don't know what is the treatment of oblique talus. You just follow them up over a period of time and see what happens. So I tend to rely less on radiology, I must say, because some of these severe vertical tali, all the extensors are tight. The EHL is tight, EDL is tight, T-band is tight. You can't even plantar flex them. So this difference between a plantar flexion and a dorsiflexion view, you can't even get them to neutral plantar flexion. They are so tight, particularly the syndromic ones. And my experience with doing this reverse Ponseti has not been good, I must say. In the syndromic feet, I have casted them forever. I have done all this when this fellow Dobbs said, put a wire, I put a wire and it failed. And Dobbs came back 5 years later and said, open the talonavicular joint and then refit and put a wire, and I did that and that failed. So now I have just stopped believing Matthew Dobbs, and I've just said, this fellow, he's going to come back in 5 years' time and say, no, do the 3 incision technique, that these two things are of no use. So I don't, congenital vertical talus and Matthew Dobbs, I've stopped